Hi, welcome to my latest video. Well, in this one, I'm going to talk about a Windows utility that's been around for quite a while. I think Windows 7, it goes back to that. It's called DISKPART, D-I-S-K-P-A-R-T, and it's short for disk partition. It does more than partition, though, and it's a command line tool. You can also open it in the more advanced command line tools that are available in Windows and other add-ons, but I like to use the basic command prompt. So I'm going to show you how it works. Now, what does this tool do for you? I've been using it for years. It allows you to, well, let's be honest with you, turn a disk into the way it was when it was first purchased. So for example, I have here various examples. I have a hard drive, 500 gig, that's still usable. Special case, obviously, would be like a backup drive for storage within a PC, let's say. I pulled this out of an old PC and upgraded, I think, that one to a 1 terabyte SSD. I've also got an SSD that's in this case a 1 terabyte SSD. This was pulled out of my former recently retired development editing PC. It's usable. It does not look like a brand new drive though, because it was being used in a RAID 0 environment on that PC. So I have two of these, but I'm going to show you how we can make it look just like it came out of the package. And the same thing for a USB. This is a standard USB 2.0, and it's not new. It's been used for quite a bit. And most recently, I installed on this a Linux environment, a bootable thing to install Linux on a PC. So it has some strange partitions on it. Basically, you can't format it through the standard Windows command because it's got some strange partitions on it that were put on there by Linux. And I'll be able to turn this one into as if it was brand new as well, with the disk partition tool. Now, in order to do the larger drives, whether it's a 2.5-inch drive, regular hard disk, or SSD like this one, or an actual hard drive like this one, I have this device. It's from BlackX, is the manufacturer of it. I've used it before. I've been using it for years. Put a hard drive in it. The slot will handle that. Or a 2.5-inch drive, whether that's an SSD or not. I can just push this in here and slide it in, and it catches it right in, and I can then connect it up using a USB. But let me show you the disk partition tool and some of the basic commands that go along with it, and then you can decide for yourself whether this is useful for you or not. Okay, I'm actually going to be using a Windows 11 environment. First of all, what is the most common thing you do when you put a USB stick, for example, or any drive, new drive in, is it'll pop up and it'll say when you try to use it that you should probably format it. And that works most of the time for the casual user of their PC in terms of making upgrades. But if you really want to do something that's useful with it, you're going to have to bring up the tool called the Disk Manager. So you do a search down in the search bar under Windows 11, for example, and you can bring this up. If you have a Windows 10 or Windows 7, you do a right click on the My Computer and you have the option of bringing up the Disk Manager. But this shows the configuration of the system I'm on. This is my VM server and it has a lot of disk, let's put it that way. Let's start from the bottom. I have a VM storage disk, which is a 2 terabyte NVMe drive, and that's where the actual VMs get stored on this VM server. I have a drive which is the drive C, which right now is using all 2 terabytes for the operating system itself. If I wanted to resize this partition, this is a tool that I could use to do it. For example, if I wanted to make some of the space available as another drive letter, I would right click on it and I could say shrink volume. That volume is that one area I've highlighted, which is the main drive C, and currently it has a lot of space on it that could be shrunk. It gives you the option of shrinking down the maximum 1.64 terabytes, the 2 terabyte drive. It starts out trying to shrink that all the way down, but I'm not going to do any shrinking here. And you could adjust this with these up arrows or type in a specific number the way that you want. So anyway, this is the standard tool for doing disk management that you can use. It has a lot of capability to it. Pretty straightforward, so I will go ahead and close this one for now and show you now DISKPART. You actually have to run a command line. So if you come into, this is Windows 11, so I happen to have it set up already in the pinned area called command, and I want to run that command prompt. So I will right click on it because I want to run it as administrator, which is really the right way to do it. I have to give it permission, and there we are. We're inside a command prompt window. I'm going to stretch it out because when I run DISKPART, I want to show you a few things. And the way you activate DISKPART is type in DISKPART and then hit enter. It shows my computer name, and it now gives us commands in DISKPART. We're now within a subsystem program, and any commands we issue, the program DISKPART is actually executing. So for example, I want to type help. These are all the commands that you can do within DISKPART. You can read these notes here, or you can go for more help. And online there is more help for this. I have a web page already set up to an area that will be very helpful, which gives the details of this in a little more explanatory form. Let me open that up. This is within Microsoft Learn. That's the actual link to it if you're interested. learn.microsoft.com, etc., all the way to the details here if you want to type it in. I'll put this down in the notes of this video as well, so you should be able to just click on it. And this describes DISKPART. It talks to you about general purpose, what it's used for, just like I started doing, and it gives you some more details. It talks about the idea of determining focus, and I'll show you that, because you have to set it up before you can do any of its commands for the most part by first focusing on one of the drives. And it gives you the syntax for using it. Now, some of them might have further commands to them, so that's something to keep in mind. They go through it here on the left-hand side if you want to see more detail about it. So for example, one that I'm definitely going to use is called create. Right here, it has create, and these are all the things that it can create. You can create a partition, you can create a volume, you can create different types of partitions and volumes. And if you want to click on the details of it, if I click on just create partition, it has different types of partitions you might want to create. I like to create a primary partition, which is one of the options that you can do. You can be very specific about it too by giving it parameters, such as the size of that partition, its offset from in the disk itself, and other more advanced features. So I just wanted to point that out to you here, okay? And the ones I'm going to focus on are, the main one is clean, but then I'm going to talk about create partition. And that's really what I'm going to talk about to clean the drives that I referred to you in the beginning of this video. Right now we're at the DISKPART thing. If I say, oh, it's also list, so I'm going to do list, and you don't have to give the first 3 letters. You can type the whole thing if you want. But if I just say list disk, again, first 3 letters, it lists the disks that are currently attached. And we saw that in the other tool, the regular graphics tool in Windows itself. It has in it a 6 terabyte, which is 5589 gigabyte formatted, and it has two 2 terabytes. Disk 0 in this case is a hard disk connected through SATA, whereas disk 1 and disk 2 are 2 terabyte NVMe M.2 drive. Now let's say I take that USB stick I showed earlier, and I'm going to plug it in to the PC that I'm using here. So now that PC is plugged in, and let me do it again. I can do up arrow on the keyboard, and I can see the last command, display disk. Now I have a 4th disk, disk 3. So it's going from 0 to 3 now, whereas prior to that, it did 0 to 2. And it shows it as 14 gigabytes. And it says 13 of those gigabytes are free. But I can tell you right now, it doesn't show here, but if I were to look at this in the partition tool, the graphics one, there are some crazy partitions that it's broken into. Because if I tried to format it, it would be a problem. It would only partially format it in the one partition that Windows can see. Because any disk can be broken up into multiple partitions, just the way disks are structured, okay? But let's say I want to get my focus on disk 3. Right now it's not, there's no focus on it. And the way you can tell is none of these have been asterisks. So let me get the focus on disk 3. So I do that by saying select SEL disk 3. It now says disk 3 is selected. If I arrow up again to the previous commands, look at list disk, look what it's put over all the way in the left-hand side of disk 3. Disk 3 is now the one that we have focus on. The command I want to show you next, which is listed up above, is called clean. Clean clears the configuration information, all information, off of the disk. By default, unless I use one of its other parameters, if I just say clean, it'll completely clean that drive out, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say CLE, which is all I have to say. I could say the whole thing if I want, but it doesn't really, not necessary. And I hit enter. Oh, by the way, Windows now pops up and says that it doesn't see the drive anymore. It saw it before, at least it saw something. So I'm going to close that, because now if I do a list disk, the size has now changed. It now knows that all 14 gigabytes are free. Be very careful with this though. This tool, especially since I'm running it as administrator, has all the power in the world. You could wipe out your main drives on this one if you select the wrong drives. So there is some risk to it. That's why you have to be careful and understand how this tool works. But now the tool is not usable, and it will not still not be formattable by Windows. I could go into the Windows utility that I had open a moment ago, And I could create a partition there for it, but that would be a separate video to talk about that if people are interested. But I'm just going to create a primary partition here, which is what you need, a primary partition, what that other tool would call a simple partition. And I do that by typing create, C-R-E, partition, and I'm going to say primary. I'm, again, mostly using only the first 3 letters. If I do that, again, my focus is still on DISK3. So that's the one that it's going to do this command on. DISKPART successfully created that new partition. If I list it, I don't think it's going to look any different though. Oh, well, now it shows 0 free. And the reason it does that is that entire free chunk, since I didn't specify a size to that partition, it took that entire free space and turned it into a partition. This free is for something that's not currently part of a partition on the disk. So it's only that extra area that might have been left over. We saw 1 gigabyte free before. Up here, still shows on the screen up here, two of these disk lists earlier. Well, it actually had a small little space that was free up there that was not assigned to one of the partitions that had been on that USB stick. Remember, this is the USB stick. So at this point, it is clean and it is done. Let me see, is there any other commands I want to show you here? I could actually do a format here, but I don't like to do the format. You have to put parameters on it to do a fast format. I'd rather not do that here. I'd rather use the Windows formatter to actually do that. So now we're done. I'm going to go ahead and exit this tool, and the proper way to do it is down at the DISKPART command again. I'm going to say exit. And now we've gone back to the Windows prompt down at the bottom, and I can close this window. I don't need this anymore. It says I need to format it before I can use it. That's the way most USB sticks are the first time you use them. Some of them you can buy already pre-formatted so that it goes to the normal Windows format. But I decided to leave it that way in case I wanted to use it for non-Windows, for example. So I'm going to say format the disk. And it gives me the little window here. It defaults to the window parameters for it. FAT32, the allocation unit size, the cluster size is what that really is, but I'm not going to get into that. And I have quick format checked, which is the right way to do it. I'll just say start. Format complete. Say OK. I can close this window. And now that drive automatically opened up. So I'm actually in this drive at that point and I can start using it. But in any case, that is done. And I can do the same thing to the other drives that I showed you. I would use the external connector, most likely, in order to connect it up to the PC through the USB, and it would show up, either one of those drives, they would show up exactly the same as a disk 3, and it would show you the size of that drive. Well, there you go. This drive is now fully scratched and cleaned. It's as if I had just bought it, and I can now use it for any other purpose without worrying about some crazy partitions that might get in the way of me using it properly. And this is the right thing to use when you've, again, put some kind of oddball operating system on this. Usually it's some variant of Linux these days, but it could be something else as well. So hopefully you got something out of this. Till next time.